So before I get into the main list, I have a few honorable mentions to bring up that didn't make the list but are still pretty good. First of all, we have the band Super Unison. They're a three-piece punk band from San Francisco. What I like about them is that their music's very energetic, it's very lively. Solid punk album. I'm not someone who normally listens to punk, and I still enjoyed it, so check it out if that's your thing. Next on my list is the new Snarky Puppy album. This is a jazz fusion band that I've been following for a while, and I didn't like the whole album that much, but there were a few highlights on here, like notably the song, the second track on here, Cement, or Cemente. I don't know if the E is silent in that title, but that was definitely my favorite track. But this album lost a few points in my book because I tried to buy this song on iTunes, and it wouldn't let me buy the song unless I bought the whole album. It said album only on it, so it's possible that its exclusion from my top 10 list was partially affected by my frustration with that. But overall, it's a pretty good album. If you like jazz, there's also some more relaxing, more loungy tracks on here as well. Definitely check it out. Also, the new Gojira album. This one was a minor disappointment for me, seeing as their other 5 albums were all just groundbreaking. I love From Mars to Sirius, I love L'Enfant Sauvage, The Way of All Flesh. They've done a lot of amazing work, and they're one of my favorite bands. But I did think this album was a bit of a step back. Wasn't quite as ambitious as their other albums. It's a little bit softer than their other albums, but there's still a lot of highlights on here. The Shooting Star is great, Silvera is great, Lowlands is great, and I still ended up buying it, and it was still one of my top listened to albums of the year. So, Gojira, Magma, pretty good. The Doom soundtrack. Doom was my favorite video game that came out this year. Bethesda did a fantastic job with it, and one of the things that I noticed when playing it was just how awesome the soundtrack was. This is probably one of the most metal game soundtracks I've ever heard. Mick Gordon did a live performance of it at the Game Awards earlier this month, and if you haven't seen that, definitely check it out. It has him on guitar. It also features Matt Halpern from Periphery on drums, and I'll post a link to that. Actually, if you look it up, go to YouTube, type in Doom Soundtrack Game Awards, you should find it. Really cool. On to the actual list itself. At number 11, we have Metallica with Hardwired to Self-Destruct. Almost everyone knows who Metallica is. Everyone's heard of them. They're probably one of the most famous bands in rock music, and in the 80s they were known for popularizing thrash metal. And they've certainly had their ups and downs over the years. They've sort of become known within the metal community as the most loved and the most hated band in metal. And for these last 2 albums, they've tried to essentially relive the glory days, give their die-hard fans a return to form, start making thrash metal again after their alt-rock phase and their whatever the hell this was. So the question in everyone's mind is, have they succeeded in bringing back what made Metallica once great? And I think with this one they have. This is definitely a step forward from their previous album, Death Magnetic. Production is better, and the songwriting is fantastic. I didn't care much for the title track, Hardwired, when it first came out, but it really makes an excellent opener to the album. Kind of gets the energy going right from the start. Moth into Flame is my favorite song in the album. This song is exactly what I was looking for from Metallica. The intro has great build-up. The guitar riff that leads to the chorus is one of their best in a while. The whole song is just exciting, it's catchy, it's straightforward, and there's enough tempo variation to keep it interesting the whole way through. Some other highlights on here were Halo on Fire and Spit Out the Bone, but the whole album is solid. This is honestly the best thing they've put out since the Black Album, and it makes me excited for where the band's headed in the future. Hopefully next time they get better album art, though. Number 10 on the list is Animals as Leaders with The Madness of Many. Animals as Leaders is an instrumental progressive metal group from Washington, D.C., and they're known for their sort of jazzy and experimental approach to prog metal. Their lead guitarist, Tosin Abasi, is known today as one of the most talented guitarists alive, and their drummer, Matt Garchka, is one of my personal inspirations as a drummer. And their last album, The Joy of Motion, ended up being my favorite album of 2014, so I was super excited to finally hear something new from them. And on some of these new songs, I was quite impressed with what I was hearing. They definitely seem to be embracing their more laid-back, sort of non-metal side. There's no hard hitters here like Tooth and Claw or Thoroughly at Home on the previous albums, but instead they seem to be sort of trying new things and pushing themselves. Like on my favorite track on the album, The Brain Dance, this track has a few different movements which transition to each other very nicely and sort of feel like a classical piece almost. However, on a lot of these tracks, I can't help but feel like they're just writing songs for other guitar players to listen to. On some of these new songs, it kind of just feels like they're being technical just for the sake of being technical. It ends up not being that fun to listen to. And my theory about that is that without the help of Misha Mansour, who helped with their first and third album, he did production work, he did drum programming, he lent some guitar and bass parts, as well as being listed as a songwriting contributor. I think it's possible that without him, they didn't really have the ability to structure their songs as well as they did before. But that's just a theory I have. It could be any number of reasons why I didn't end up liking some of these songs as much. But that being said, there were a lot of highlights on here. I did enjoy Ectogenesis. I liked Inner Assassins, Private Visions of the World, and like I mentioned before, the Brain Dance, as well as the last track here, Pyrophobia, which closes the album out with a nice sort of clean guitar piece. Overall, if you like instrumental music, if you like progressive metal or progressive rock, then definitely check this album out. It's worth listening to. At number 9, we have the Canadian jazz group Badbadnotgood. This is their 4th album, and this is kind of an interesting band because despite them being a jazz group, they're actually known for doing a lot of collaborations with hip-hop artists like Earl Sweatshirt, Danny Brown, and Ghostface Killer. And on this album, it's mostly instrumental, but there's a few vocal features on here that are really nice. There's some relaxing songs as well as some more lively songs. One of my favorite songs on here is the song Speaking Gently, which starts off very mellow and ethereal, and as the track goes on, the drums sort of pick up the pace, and it builds into this really amazing explosion of sound. The production here is great, and at the end of the song there's a sax solo also, which fits into the song really nicely. My other favorites on here were Confessions Part 2 and Lavender. So this is a great jazz album, highly recommended for anyone who's looking for instrumental music that's fresh and innovative. And at number 8, we have one of my all-time favorite bands, Meshuggah, with their new album, The Violent Sleep of Reason. Meshuggah is a heavy, technical metal band from Sweden that has released many groundbreaking albums. My personal favorites among them are Chaosphere and Obscura, the latter of which is one of my most listened to albums of all time. For those of you who have not heard of Meshuggah before, their sound is super heavy, intense, and most of all, it's rhythmically complex. Their constant use of polyrhythms will have your head spinning the first time you listen to them, but behind all the complex song structures are often surprisingly groovy, catchy, original, well-written songs. Meshuggah has always offered a perfect blend of brutality, groove, and technicality that makes their music just infectious. So what I like about this album more than anything is the production. This is the first album that they've recorded live, which means all the instruments were played at the same time rather than separately. And so this gives the album more of an organic feel than they've had in the past. Sort of a deviation from the robotic sound that they had on Nothing and Obscura. And this isn't to say that those albums are any worse by comparison, but it does make this one sound very original and unique. Highlights on this album for me, Born in Dissonance, By the Ton, and Stifled were probably my 3 favorite tracks. Every one of these songs grew on me over time as I began to comprehend more of the album. And I have to say, this album's right up there with everything else Meshuggah has done. It's heavy, it's technical, it's catchy, it's down-tuned, it's everything that you'd want in a Meshuggah album. What's always amazed me about Meshuggah is that without ever changing their style too much, they always seem to deliver albums that are hard-hitting and just diverse enough to stay interesting throughout the album. So as far as comparing this album to their previous albums, I wouldn't say this is a huge leap forward, but I certainly wouldn't say it's a step backward either. At number 7, we have Destrage with A Means to No End. And Destrage is a prog metal band from Italy, but really they're more than just a prog metal band. Their music tends to be very eccentric and experimental. They're constantly blending genres together to really create their own unique sound. And especially considering that a lot of new metal bands these days tend to be kind of monotonous and boring, a band like this really is a breath of fresh air. Their previous album, which was one of my favorites of 2014, had kind of a sporadic, more technical sound that was balanced with some catchy melodies and vocal hooks here and there. And when I first heard this band, it was really hard to compare it to anything else that I had heard, but it did remind me of the first Sixth album, or maybe a heavier version of System of a Down. But on this new album, they seem to be going for more of a straightforward sound, focusing less on technicality and more on melody and structure. And with this new approach, the album has a much better flow from start to finish because it feels more like an adventure or a story is being told, even if it's not a concept album. I really love every part of this album. The acoustic intro at the beginning is really nice. Silent Consent and Symphony of the Ego both have this sort of forward driving pace that I really like. There's some more progressive tracks on here, like the song Ending to a Means, which is more of a mellow instrumental track. And there's some faster songs on here, like the song To Be Tolerated. Now, because this is a less technical album than the last, the instrumental work from the guitar and drums isn't quite as impressive, but the vocals here are outstanding. Just like on their previous album, I absolutely love what the vocalist does here. He has a sort of a unique style that gives the band their own flavor. The whole album is just epic, it's dynamic, adventurous, and it's diverse. I'd highly recommend it to anyone who's a fan of rock or metal music, and really this is the first album on the list that I can't think of any major complaints about. So I wasn't initially planning on doing this, but I'm going to make this video into a two-parter, and this will be the end of the first part. And so the next video will be just my top 6. Hope you guys enjoyed. Be sure to leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe to my channel. If you like my music taste, subscribe to me on Spotify. And I will catch you guys in the next one.